So yesterday I was at the Mississippi Forge Council meeting, and a guy came up to me and asked me, what's the best weight hammer to start with when I'm learning blacksmithing? And of course there were some other Forge Council members around, and I think there are as many opinions on this subject as there are types of hammers, really. I think there's two general schools of thought when it comes to hammer weight. Use a light hammer, but swing it really fast to generate power through velocity, or use a heavy hammer and just let gravity do the work and let the weight of that hammer move the work. And I think one thing that needs to be taken into account there is the heat in your steel. If your steel is not up to proper forging temperature, then you're going to have a really hard time moving that piece of metal regardless of what hammer you use. And so the first rule of thumb, I would say, when you're talking about hammer weight and whatnot, is to make sure that whatever you're using, that your metal is up to forging temp. After that, I would say to start, a new blacksmith or bladesmith should start smaller than heavier. For one, you don't want to injure yourself. Picking up, for example, a 4-pound beast hammer is going to town with that, when you're not used to doing that motion, you haven't built the muscle and ligament support necessary to do that repetitive action, you're likely going to be, if not really sore the next day, but you might have torn something. You might be injured if you do that too much. And so, it's not about this manly thing of, oh, I've got to use this huge hammer. Use the hammer that you can control first and foremost. So, I mean, if you're a monster weightlifter and you've been throwing weights around for a long time and picking up a 4-pound hammer is absolutely nothing to you, then hey, you might start with a heavier hammer than I would. And so, first of all, don't start with too heavy of a hammer, I would say, just because you want to give your body time to adjust to that. But the second thing there is, if you're using too heavy of a hammer, you're going to have a hard time with control. And hammer control is a phrase that's tossed around a lot. But what does that mean? What does hammer control mean? And I think it means, basically, in a nutshell, that you're placing hammer blows where you want them to go in the manner that you want them to go. And so, for example, a typical rounding hammer, a typical blacksmith rounding hammer has a rounded face and a flat face, but it also has these rounded sides here that can be used as fullers. You can hit on the side. The round face moves metal in all directions. The flat face kind of planishes or smooths material. But knowing where that hammer face is going to hit, the center of this face, you want that to hit where you're trying to hit. That takes muscle memory, and it takes practice. It's just like any other skill. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And so if you're swinging around a big, heavy hammer, you're more than likely going to have a hard time placing those blows accurately. And so that's another point that I believe in, is that starting with a lighter hammer allows you to develop hammer control faster and I think with greater efficiency or quality of your work, or quality of your hammer blows. They're going where you want them to go. And so, back to the two schools of thought, velocity versus brute strength or whatnot. I found, for me, that there's a balance, and that balance is around the 2-pound mark or 2.5-pound mark right now. Now I do use heavier hammers on occasion, but by and large, I go back to about a 2.5-pound hammer. And it's just because it's what I've become most familiar with. And so I can swing this with speed when I need to, but I can also swing this with great control. And so for me personally, I found a hammer in the 2.5, maybe 3-pound range is what I'm the most comfortable with. Now, as I've gotten more experienced, I have started to use a slightly heavier hammer, a 3.5-pound hammer on occasion, but it's something I feel like I'm working up to. I'm getting stronger with it. I'm learning to control it better. But still, I find myself more often than not going back to this small 2.5-pound, I say small, this smaller 2.5-pound rounding hammer, just because it's what I'm most familiar with now. So with that said, my opinion on what weight hammer you should use when you're starting is I think you should use a hammer weight that you are comfortable swinging. If you have to really use a lot of effort to get that hammer up in the air, I think you should probably bring it down a little bit. And again, that's not to be disparaging on anyone's physical capabilities. That's just me trying to give you advice saying, look, you will be a better smith if you use a hammer that you can control. So with that said, let me just show you some of the hammers that I've used and talk a little bit about their purposes. This was the first hammer that I started with. It's a 2-pound cross peen hammer. I think this is a Plum brand, but it was in a junk pile when I found it and needed to be cleaned up pretty good. And so it didn't have a handle on it, so I put a handle on it, and I think this is maybe my 2nd or 3rd handle, but cleaned it up, rounded the faces out and polished those out, and worked on the peen a little bit. Some people call this end of the hammer a peen, P-E-E-N or P-E-I-N. I don't really know what the right way to spell that is, but the peen is usually the back end of the hammer that is shaped differently than the face for doing different kind of work. And so for a cross peen hammer, you have a face that's narrowed down. Some of them are done vertically, some of them are horizontal, some of them are diagonal. But the cross peen allows material, when you hit the material, it moves in 2 directions rather than when you hit with this face, it moves in all directions. So cross peen, that's what I started with. I still wind up using this hammer a good bit. This is a dog's head hammer. This is often seen in, if you look up Japanese swordsmiths, they are using this type of hammer, and typically they are weighted forward. Some have a flat face, some have a more rounded face, but the weight forward design is supposed to help with setting the bevels on your blade, and it allows you to stay at a particular angle on your work, I think. To be honest with you, I haven't done a whole lot of research into using dog's head hammers. I've used this one a good bit, but I still kind of gravitate back toward a rounding hammer, even for bladesmithing. That's just what I'm comfortable with. A ball peen hammer. Just about every guy that's got a garage or a shop probably has a ball peen hammer, and these are fantastic hammers for forging. I really like it, especially if you're doing smaller work. The face is typically already rounded. I would just say if you've got a ball peen you're wanting to get started, just knock these edges back a little bit, smooth those edges so you don't have a nice sharp edge on the hammer. But I use ball peens a whole lot, especially when I'm making some decorative work. I'll turn the round ball peen around and use that to texture the steel a good bit. So a standard ball peen, I think this is a Blue Point brand, made in Wisconsin. And I think it's a 24 ounce. So this hammer gets used an awful lot. So, well, there's another smaller cross peen. This is a really small, this is about a 1 pound cross peen. Typically for really small fine work. There's another different style of cross peen. Again, a really heavy rounding hammer. And there's a 3.5 pound rounding hammer. And of course I've got other hammers laying over here, but for the most part, I use either a cross peen hammer or a rounding hammer for most of my work. And most often in the 2.5 pound range. So anyway, I just wanted to throw this video out there and to say, if you're getting into blacksmithing and you're wondering about, hey, what hammer should I use? If you go to a hardware store, you're more than likely going to find these two hammers on the shelf. This may be called an engineer's cross peen hammer or a blacksmithing hammer. And of course a ball peen hammer. If you go get two of these one of these hammers each, a ball peen and a cross peen, you can do all kinds of work. And again, get them in weights that you feel comfortable swinging, not weights that you're thinking will impress someone. So anyway, I just thought I would throw that out there. I hope that helps. If you've got any questions about hammers or about the hammers I use or even the hammers I make, shoot them in the comments below and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. So thanks. Bye.